So anyone who is not a customer of AJ Bell, so on your screen, you'll see some information about us. Now, we offer a full range of investment accounts, ISAs and SIPs, and we're both a which recommended platform provider and a which recommended SIP provider. On your screen, you'll see an investment disclaimer for you to read through. Now, the highlights of which are that we don't offer advice. Nothing you hear tonight is going to be a recommendation or endorsement. And if you are not sure about the suitability of an investment, you should seek qualified independent financial advice. Now, that's it for housekeeping. So let's get on with the show. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of investing in Europe. So in my introduction, I'll be covering the different indices that you should look at when you're trying to assess what's going on in European markets. I'll talk about some of the stocks and also some of the funds. I've got some really interesting statistics about how the best performing European funds have done over the last 3, 5, and 10 years as well. And I'll just discuss the different ways and the products that you can look at to get exposure to this space. Just a quick disclaimer again on your screen. I will be talking about some past performance figures. It's really important to understand that what's happened in the past isn't guaranteed to happen in the future, so please bear that in mind. Okay, so I just think that after a long period of underperformance from the US, a long period of underperformance, I guess, Europe relative to the US market, Europe's now playing catch up. We've seen the US race ahead. But actually this year, the tables seem to be turning. Valuations in Europe are quite attractive on a relative basis, particularly against the US. Investors are actually, they're taking a look at this space and thinking, there's some interesting companies here. Perhaps I didn't realize what Europe's got to offer. And there's been some really good, strong news out from European companies. In the first quarter of this year, 60% of European companies beat earnings per share estimates by 5% or more. 19% missed, which means there's a 41% net beat. Now that is a record high since 2007. So some of the companies that have been beating the market's expectations, including Deutsche Post, Volkswagen, LVMH, and even Deutsche Bank had its best quarterly profit for 7 years. So we're just about to enter into the reporting period for the second quarter numbers. And I think the market will be closely looking at these figures, given how impressive, in general, the first quarter numbers were. So Europe is actually forecast to have stronger economic growth in 2022 versus the US. So on your screen, you can see some figures from the IMF. This is what they were predicting in March. So they're thinking that US is going to be 3.5%, but the Euro area is going to be 3.8% economic growth. Now, if you just look at some of those individual countries, Spain is expected to see 4.7% growth, and France 4.2%, and Italy 3.6%. So clearly these figures would come out in March, and a lot's happened in the subsequent months, particularly with the pace of economies reopening, society reopening. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some quite big amendments to these numbers, but for now, they give us quite good reason to be optimistic about Europe in general from an investment perspective. If you're looking to put money into this space, there's several ways you can do it. You can invest in individual company shares. AJ Bell platform has lots of the big names on it. So it's not simply about just looking at UK stocks on the Uinvest platform. Lots of overseas names are on there as well. You can also look at funds as well. So there's masses of European funds that have stakes in European companies or even European bonds as well. So you can look at passive funds, which are track of certain indices, and this might be an exchange traded fund or an ETF, they're sometimes known as, or you could look at actively managed funds, and this is where a fund manager is running the show, deciding what should go in and also what should come out of that portfolio. And the two presenters we got tonight, they both are representing actively managed funds. You can also invest in bonds. So this is company bonds or government bonds. And I think for retail investors in the UK, probably the easiest way to get access to this space would perhaps be through a fund that specializes in bonds. So if we think that the MSCI Europe indices is quite a good benchmark for the European stock market, it's outperformed the MSCI All Country World Index since February by about 3%. Now that figure's up till June. But I still think that lots of people look at this space as if it's unloved. There's good and bad reasons for this. So I think it's fair to say that over the last 10 years, investors have been a bit wary about Europe. It's beset with low economic growth, the weak euro currency, there's been political risk, and and arguably a struggling banking sector. But I feel that there's a different dynamic at the moment. I think that EU members are starting to spend some of the money that's been allocated to the Bloc's recovery fund, and also these vaccinations. Vaccines are being rolled out quite a pace here, and I think that Europe is represented by quite a few sectors that should do well in theory when the economy is picking up again. So I'm thinking automotive and banks, and also the European stocks actually, quite a lot of them pay healthy dividends as well. So on your screen, you can see a couple, some examples of some names here. So we've got Nestle, consumer goods company, and the pharma group Novo Nordisk. Now, some people might say these are fairly slow growth businesses, but I'd argue if you're constructing a good investment portfolio, it's quite good to have reliable or dependable companies that have a very good track record in it. But equally, Europe's got some pretty good innovative companies in there as well. So if you just look at Ørsted, it used to be all about fossil fuels, but it's completely transitioned to renewable energy now. So it's got a 24% share of the offshore wind market outside of China. Knorr-Bremse is active in green transportation, and it's a global leader in braking systems for commercial road and rail sectors. You've got names like Dassault and Nemetschek, which are involved in the digitization of industry. And I think, yes, investors have looked for the US market for fast growth, but I think that Europe does have a lot to offer in terms of innovation, and certainly perhaps less mature companies that are taking share from larger companies. Prosus is a really interesting name here. This is Europe's largest consumer internet investor, and it's got meaningful stakes in Chinese companies Tencent and Ctrip, and also in the German food platform Delivery Hero. If you're looking at stock market and trying to think, well, okay, which indices should I be monitoring to get a sense of how Europe as a whole is performing? Well, there's lots of different ones you can look at. So in France, there's the CAC 40, Spain's got the IBEX 35, there's the OMX Stockholm 30 in Sweden, and Italy's got the FTSE MIB. But I think there's two indices that perhaps you should look at first and foremost. The first one would be the Euro Stocks 50. So this is 50 large companies in the Eurozone. You can see on your screen that there's some how it's performed. In the year to 10th of June this year is up 12%, and that's better than the UK stock market as represented by the FTSE 100. It's also better than the US as well. The S&P 500 is only up 9%. We look on a longer term basis. Yes, the US is far outperformed the Eurostox, but Eurostox is better by quite a margin than the FTSE 100. The Eurostox 50 it's a market cap weighted indices, but it excludes stocks listed in the UK, Scandinavia, and Switzerland. And really, it's dominated by French and German companies. I think they take up about 2/3 of these constituents by number. And then you've got representation from Spain, Italy, and places like the Netherlands. You know, unlike the FTSE in the UK, Eurostoxx doesn't have mining companies. There's no tobacco companies in there either. So you're more looking at consumer discretionary stocks. So here, thinking like personal goods and media and automobiles. There's some financials in there, healthcare and industrials. And the biggest players include the semiconductor group ASML, luxury goods group LVMH, and the software company SAP. This is a German business, but now has offices around the world. And if you were to want to find a tracker fund that is designed to mirror the performance of this indices, one example would be the Invesco Eurostoxx 50 ETF. And you can see on trading platforms, you just look for the code SX5S. And so I said that there's two indices that you really need to look at first and foremost when judging what's happening in Europe. And in addition to the Eurostoxx, there's the DAX. So this is the 30 largest companies on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. There's no mining here, there's no oil and gas and tobacco. It's much more skewed towards consumers. So you've got names like Adidas and BMW, Daimler, Lufthansa and Volkswagen. Financials used to be a much bigger part of this index, but perhaps less so these days. You've also got chemical companies like BASF, healthcare like Merck and Bayer. And then on the tech side, in addition to SAP, there's names like Infineon there as well. And if you're looking for a tracker fund to follow this index, one example is the iShares Core DAX ETF. So that's the ticker 0MLH. So if you don't fancy investing in individual stocks, another way would be to look at actively managed funds. So on your screen, I've done a little exercise looking at open-ended funds. So this includes things like unit trusts and OICs. I've looked for funds that have delivered a top quartile performance over 3, 5, and 10 years. And to get on the list, they've got to have been in the top quartile for all of those periods. You can see that the Marlborough fund is at the top, but actually we've got a good showing from Baillie Gifford and BlackRock as well, and those two asset managers are represented tonight by our speakers, so they'll tell you a bit more about how they've looked for opportunities across Europe. I've done the same for the investment trust space, looking at the Europe ex-UK sector. And on your screen, you can see that there's only one name, and it's BlackRock Greater Europe. And again, we'll have some information tonight from the speakers about what is in that portfolio and what it does. And then I thought, okay, well, if we look at this space, let's look at the small companies as well. I think you mustn't overlook small companies, particularly if you've got an appetite for a risk. There's some interesting names. And so in the open-ended fund space, there's funds that have met my criteria for top quartile performance 3, 5, 10 years, include ASI Europe, so that's the Aberdeen's smaller companies fund for Europe, and also a Janus Henderson product on there as well. And then if we look at the investment trust space, there's only one that qualifies for our search, and that is the Montanaro European Smaller Companies Trust. Just to reiterate, if you want to study those tables, you will be able to look back at this presentation, and you'll be able to get the slides, and you can look at them at your leisure. But just remember, as I mentioned at the start, it's simply what's done well in the past isn't guaranteed to do well in the future. So I think it's worth touching on just one more point before I sort of bring in our speakers, is that you have in the small company space. If you look at something like the MSCI Europe small cap indices, quite a big chunk of that is UK stocks. So if you've already got UK shares in your portfolio and you're looking to add some European exposure, you might perhaps want to look at funds that explicitly exclude the UK from their search. That avoids you doubling up. And the other thing is that sometimes when you look at let's say the MSCI Europe small cap indices again, well, some of its names in there aren't quite what I call small caps. It's got names that are represented in the UK, including Rightmove. It's a FTSE 100 company. So you just need to have a look through some of the finer wording when you're doing your research for some of these funds. Anyway, so we write about European stocks and European funds quite a lot in shares, so please do read the magazine on a regular basis. We give you some really great information there.